of Commerce has also those very challenges that everybody else is dealing with as well, in regards to staying in touch with its members and making sure we can get through this together. I was thinking about this the other day in regards to what we're going through. In 2008, I was a journalist at that time and was based in India, moving over to China. And in between both postings, I'd wait for my visa to China, which takes a couple of months to get a journalist visa. So I parked myself in London, working out of a bureau there, as the financial crisis hit at that time. And the significant impact you were seeing on a daily basis in Europe was just heartbreaking to see. And I recall flying over to Ireland, and there's a small little country, as you very much know with its history, losing people to the potato famine. But that very 2008 crisis had such an impact on that country. What we're dealing with here today and now is significantly larger, significantly larger. You look at the numbers this morning, unemployment rate of 13%. That's viewed as good news, as some were expecting 18%. You're seeing a disproportionate impact on young people, 15 to 24-year-olds, 34% have lost employment. A huge impact on our food industry, retail trade, service sector have been hit very, very hard. The other day, on Monday, Andrew Wilkinson put out a letter, our leader, in regards to some of the temporary things that we can bring in quickly, or government should bring in quickly, to help our businesses move forward. We've asked for a temporary relief, 60 to 90 days, for the provincial sales tax, EHT, and even accommodation tax. We want short-term commercial rent relief as well to help our small businesses. We want to see an increase in the tourism marketing budget as well, because that will be very important in regards to our recovery. And we want a rural BC specific strategy, which isn't specific to Richmond, but broadly we brought and started talking about that this week. As you know, we have been working with government as this was happening. I think most British Columbians are happy about that, because we have to work together to make sure we can help our constituents and residents of British Columbia. The conversation now, while public safety and health are still priority number one, the conversation now is shifting towards economy and recovery, which I think is a good thing and a great thing. I think everybody's been waiting for that. So today, we're very happy to answer your questions, but also want to hear from you and listen from you so we can take some of these back to our party and our opposition, as our opposition role, more importantly, to bring up some of these with government. We are talking to government on a daily basis and have internal briefings from deputy ministers as well, and so we can bring those concerns to them. We expect another legislative session to occur. When, at this point, we don't know. As many of you know, there's concern over COVID reappearing in a much more significant way in the fall. So we could probably see a ledge sitting prior to that. Don't hold me to that, but I think we're generally headed in that direction. It'll be a short session, but we're headed in that direction, and I'm sure the government will announce that in the next few weeks. So those are my words at this particular point, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jas. And now we'll go over to MLA Wat.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everybody. What a good sunny morning that we can have this virtual town hall with so many of you. For the first time with our 4 Richmond MLA and also the Richmond Chamber of Commerce. I would really like to thank the Chamber and also President Matt Pecan for hosting such a meaningful platform for us to share our views. Many of you are business owners, and I want to give you a warm welcome. Whether your business are open or not, you should be recognized for your effort to flatten the curve amid COVID-19 pandemic. Kudos to you all, and let's give all our business owners a round of applause. Many of the business in Richmond are located in my riding of Richmond North Centre. And in such trying times, I can feel your pain and frustration. Although this Wednesday announcement by the Premier has set plans in motion to slowly reopen our economy, it will still be a long time before things can return to normal. And the road to recovery is not an easy one. Now is the time to put the wheels in motion and start putting Richmond's business on the road to economic recovery. My colleagues and I are looking forward to hearing from all of you, and we will be certain to bring your concern and feedback to Victoria. Like everyone here, I want to see Richmond business have every opportunity for success. so we can keep our doors open and get our community thriving once again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa. All right, well, now we are going to jump into some questions. Now, I see so far, I don't think I've seen any questions come through from all the attendees. So again, if you're new to Zoom, click at the bottom of your screen. You will see the chat feature, and it'll be set to everyone by default. And I encourage you to submit your questions there, and we will, again, try and get through as many as possible. At this point, if you get it in the next 5-10 minutes, I can almost guarantee it's going to go forward. So the first question, and it's come up a lot, and I know it's on everybody's mind, is debt. You know, we knew before this crisis that Canadian household debt's at a, I'm going to say not all-time high, if all-time high or close. And you know, with the amount of debt being taken on by the provincial government, largely by the federal government, you know, there's a lot of concern amongst our members, and I think citizens at large of how we're going to crawl out of this massive financial hole that we're digging. So I'm wondering if you could speak, you know, maybe to your party and, you know, opposition's suggestions that will be coming forward to government to how we can generate new economic activities and generate new economic growth in BC to get people working again and to overcome this massive burden of debt that we're taking on throughout this crisis.
Well, I can try and answer that one, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, John.
So first of all, good morning, everyone. It's great to see a lot of faces, and like you, I've been self-isolating, and this is the new world of business by Zoom. It's been a very trying time the last few months, and now, as we have seen, the COVID-19 curve has been flattened thanks to everyone's efforts and sacrifice, and we now have the opportunity to think about transitioning to reopening. And as the question is posed, you know, how are we going to recover from this? You know, the concern that is pointed to in the question regarding debt and how are we going to deal with this and grow the economy is really, you know, very, very relevant. We have always said as a caucus, and formerly when we were in government, that the key to a thriving BC is a strong economy. And fortunately, we've had in BC a strong economy until this unfortunate pandemic hit. So there really is no magic. I think once we see the economy reopen, and hopefully we get through this transition safely without a very serious spike or second wave, as everyone is referring to, that we can think about how we can focus efforts on incentivizing the private sector. That's, you know, most of you folks on the Zoom here who are in the business of enterprise, of encouraging growth, you know, in all the important sectors, you know, whether it's in tourism, whether it's in real estate development, whether it's in services. We need entrepreneurs, we need businesses to feel confident that, you know, in spite of this challenge that we've gone through and will continue to go through, with the new world that we're facing, at least until the vaccine is found, how do we get our economy going? And it actually comes down to giving people that vote of confidence that you know what you're doing. And as Jas mentioned, our leader, Andrew Wilkinson, had provided some constructive proposals to government to consider as government looks at reopening and charging up the economy to grow. And those include things like giving a holiday, at least on a temporary basis, on some taxes like PST and the EHT, you know, which will make a difference. And also all of the supports that have been put in place to help businesses hang on and survive through this process. That has led to some debt at the individual level, and, you know, certainly we have seen government has signaled that, you know, this crisis, this pandemic has led to a complete rewrite of their budget. So the bottom line really is we need to see a plan from government to grow the economy as we get through this pandemic. And, you know, it's going to be a very interesting challenge, the new normal, until we have a robust vaccine system, will be that, you know, in the next year, perhaps longer, that we would be having to live with this new normal of social distancing, of being concerned about procedures to make workplaces safe and places of business safe. So these are all things that we need to be concerned about as we move forward.
Well, thank you.
Matt, can I jump in just for a second on that? I think what we have to understand here is there is the near-term needs of our small business communities, and that's why we did introduce those changes we think would help businesses, small businesses in particular, PST, EHT, those types of things, and then obviously greater budgets for our tourism side. The challenge we've had prior to COVID has been 21 different taxes increased or introduced by this government. And that is about $1,100 to $1,200 in new taxes paid for by every man, woman, and child in this province. Now, we've had the fiscal situation for this province prior to COVID looked really good. We're proud of contributing to that with 5 balanced budgets prior to that, and we were putting money into infrastructure projects in this province. But without a thriving economy, this government presently can forget about building new schools, new hospitals, projects in and around earthquake protection for our schools as well. All those things that the government had promised prior to that have been thrown out. In fact, whatever gains we made even in elective surgeries as BC Liberals and the NDP made in the last 3 years have now been thrown out the window just with dealing with COVID alone. So the new normal has completely changed everything. It's a 180-degree turn. Prior to COVID, there was very little coming into the major projects office in government. Yes, Amazon is opening up a space downtown. Shopify is adding 1,000 new employees, or prior to COVID said they were going to. But in regards to major projects, we do not see much. And LNG is not one of them, simply because that's what started under us. We see nothing following LNG. And that's one project, mind you. Now, what I will say in regards to Dr. Henry is she hasn't shut down the economy, in that we still have the man camps. LNG was still moving forward. Mining was still moving forward in some cases. But when everybody is told to stay home, that's not going to help small business. And that's why we're going back to EHT and PST relief temporarily. What we have to have a conversation is those 21 taxes and how we start attracting major business and investment. It's not just about cutting, which we're going to have to do in some cases, or at least deferring. It is about attracting that business. And while I do not have the specific numbers, and only the finance ministry would know what's going on, I've already heard deficit in the provincial side of potentially $10 billion, maybe 12. That's massive. So we have to decide, and the government has to decide, how are we going to attract that investment? I can see some employees being hired, but to think that we're going to go back to mid-January where we had, let's just say 100% employment, even though we didn't. But to get to that pre-COVID level employment is going to be difficult next month. And that's the challenge. So there has to be a mix of temporary relief, the kind that we've introduced here. And I don't think the government's done enough yet on the provincial side. And then how are we going to start attracting major business and major investment in all our communities? I mean, the speculation tax isn't helping anybody right now. Perhaps we should temporarily stop it for a while. Those are the kind of conversations I think we need to be having, and we're not at this particular point.
Well, thank you, Jas. And I see a lot of questions are starting to roll in, so that's fantastic. So I'm going to start trying to rip through these fairly quickly, and I may just pick on an MLA and throw them their way just so we can keep things moving quickly. And John, you mentioned, and Jas too, the letter from Andrew Wilkinson to government, and I have to say there were some things that overlapped with recommendations that the BC Chamber and chambers like ours had made to government as well. So maybe Linda, I'm going to throw this one over to you. What response has there been from government to the recent letter from the opposition?
I'm not convinced there's been a great response yet. I think they're going to take some time to think about it. you will know that they put a committee together of 3 cabinet ministers that are going to sort of adjudicate some of those decisions along the way. I hope there's a session. I don't believe there will be a full house if Bonnie Henry stays to maximum 50 people coming together in a room. As you know, we are 87 legislators. The federal house meets in smaller numbers. We certainly can. I think we've learned some good things about working remotely. So can we still steer the course and hold the government to account? I believe we can, but there's lots and lots of work to do in terms of how we reach any of those decisions.
Can I just jump in 1 second? I'm sorry. I think that's the right answer that Linda's gave. The problem isn't going to be just the opposition. It's going to be every one of you on this call, making sure government hears from you, because that's what's going to change things. I think there will be a push towards infrastructure spending, SkyTrain, some of these bigger projects, perhaps hospitals being built, perhaps the extended care units you talked about in Vancouver, and of course here in Richmond, that we desperately need, Emergency Acute Care Center. But the pressure is going to have to come from the public. And the numbers, employment numbers that are coming out is what's going to drive all this. The more that you are all collectively vocal is the chance, is what's going to move this government to do stuff. And that means sometimes doing things that may be 180 degrees different than what they politically and philosophically believe in. But these are unprecedented times, and you have to start making unprecedented decisions.
I agree with what Jess said, because small business actually make up most of our business in Richmond. So I urge each or every one of you to try to get access to Andrew Wilkinson's letter to the Premier, because if we don't give incentive to small business to restart the economy, our economy won't be moving. So right now, it's important to give more incentive, as Jess mentioned it, and my colleague John Yap also mentioned it in the beginning. So Andrew has suggested a 60 to 90-day holiday on provincial sales tax, hotel tax, and employer health tax, and also a lot, try to erase a lot of barriers to small business doing their operation. So this is important. Otherwise, no small business would be willing to start their operation, and our economy cannot go anywhere. So 90% of our business are made up of small business. So please take a look at Andrew's letter to the Premier. And as Jess said, we should all, each and every one of us, should speak up to the MLA, to the government, so that they will listen to us.
Thank you, Teresa. Teresa, I'll come back to you on this one as well, just because this question came from a very well-known, long-standing nonprofit that's in your riding, but I've seen a few different messages pop up. And, you know, we have about 80 or 90 members today that are members of the Richmond nonprofit community. And while they're nonprofits, like our chamber, you know, of course, we are businesses and we have operations to run as well. And I know there's a lot of concern out there regarding the closure of casinos. And of course, in our backyard, River Rock is one of the largest employers in Richmond, and they fully shut their door through this crisis, along with all the other casinos. And therefore, there's going to be a massive decline in gaming funds. And we know those gaming funds go a long way to helping the nonprofits that do some great work in our communities. So, you know, Jas had just mentioned that cuts are going to be needed, and we know that, and we're seeing that. And I think, you know, revenue declines in the gaming sector is going to have direct and immediate impacts on gaming funds that are available. What would be your government's position, or comment, I should just say? I don't expect a position, but how are we going to weather this storm? Because there's going to be a lot of groups that aren't going to be getting these funds that they really depend on.
And that's why, as I said earlier, that thank you, Matt, for that question. And I also receive a lot of emails, including non-profit organization, and there's one in particular that cannot meet the criteria, BC Hydro, because BC Hydro, for example, just give a 3-month waiving the payment for those small business, but the non-profit organization do not fall under that category. So the government has to be more flexible in trying to help, not only just some small business, but all small business, including the non-profit organization. So getting back to your question about, it's too bad that casino won't be open until we might get even more stable, then we'll be losing the gaming fund for our non-profit organization. And that's why the government needs to give more attention and try to look at each sector and try to come up with plans on how to help them. And it has to be a more detailed plan. As you mentioned earlier, good news that Premier Hogan announced the restarting the economy, but it's all very weak. look at the What Save BC website. They are asking each business to just follow the guidelines. And it's very general guidelines, and they don't give you specific guidelines on how to open your operation. So I have heard from some small businesses that they won't even want to open it. So if small businesses do not have incentive to start their operation, how are we going to restart our economy? And that's extremely important.
Matt, can I just jump in just on that one alone, and specific to River Rock? And I know Chuck Keeling, I think I saw him there. He's on the Zoom call as well. And I know there's a significant amount of dollars obviously go to the city of Richmond as well. You know, we advocated strenuously for the food bank about 8 weeks ago. And I don't have the numbers before me, but I think the government put in an emergency funding for about $3 million. Literally, the food banks were going to shut down in some cases in smaller communities throughout this province. So very proud of that advocacy, and we were able to find money. The reality is, this is driven by public health and safety. Dr. Bonnie Henry and her suggestion in regards to the 50-person limit that Linda alluded to, that we all heard of. We can't turn that around. That's going to impact the casino sector. That's going to impact the sporting sector when we talk about the Vancouver Canucks and many other sporting franchises. We can't get around that. That's where I think there, in my personal opinion, it may just be government subsidizing these groups for 6 months to a year, or whatever that gaming grant represented, before we can slowly start opening up. The ultimate solution is a vaccine. It's just that simple. And this is one of those very rare occasions where, you know, I love to see the casino open. They generate a tremendous amount of dollars for the people of British Columbia, and particularly these organizations. But this is a public health and safety decision and not an economic one. And that has to be number one, first of all. So this is a classic example where I think government does have to step in. But the faster we can get to that vaccine, and as the numbers hopefully will look better as we head into the fall, we can start having that conversation, perhaps letting, you know, moving towards 100 people, 150 people. But that's one, sadly, that the opposition can't really advocate for today and now. It just comes down to epidemiologists and biologists that's something I can't answer to. So I think that's specifically, if we have that sector listening in today, I would say that's where government has to step in and help out some of these organizations, because they do help the most vulnerable in our community. So.
Oh, thank you, Jas. Now I'm going to go to one of our pre-submitted questions. I'm going to go to Linda on this one. Linda, what would you like to see in terms of parliamentary operations in the coming weeks to months? Should the BC legislature remain recessed until the fall, or do you think that you know, MLAs should be getting back safely together to convene in person and start tackling some of these challenges?
Matt, thanks for the question. We've learned a lot in terms of parliamentary practice in the last number of months. Many parliamentary committees meet remotely now. We've never had so much activity on the Zoom platform. And the notion that other parliaments across the land have smaller houses coming together, 15 or 20 members, that's in place today. We've certainly done that in the short day session a few weeks back. We can have party representation, numbers represented in the House without having 87 members on the floor. So we can easily continue to do the work of the House. And frankly, I hope some of this work that we've done, that we've learned today, carries forward, and that we do some more work remotely in the years to come. Because it's a cost savings to the system. Bringing 87 people together for, you know, for a House sitting, you can do one of those days a week remotely. You could save enormous dollars on a go-forward basis. So there's lots of things to explore. But does the work of Parliament continue just in a different venue, a different platform, different format? Yes, it absolutely can.
Oh, thank you, Linda.
Matt, I want to add that even though legislature is not in session, we have to know that all the MLAs are working extremely hard. Even though we are not going back to Victoria. And every day we are on to Zoom meeting, and even our select committee, for example, I myself is a member of the select committee on children and youth. We are listening to the representative on talking about the issues facing those youth at care and child at care. And we are still working as hard. And our constituent office, even though it's closed, but our staff are working from home and getting emails and also phone calls and returning phone calls to them and trying to help them solve their problem and trying to forward their concern to the government. And I myself have been arranging donations of masks and also gloves to different senior homes. All of us have been working extremely hard, even though the legislature is not in session.
So Matt, if I can just throw in, and this could be useful for a future Trivial Pursuit game, if that game still exists. The very first Zoom meeting that an official Legislative Assembly of British Columbia standing committee held was by the Public Accounts Committee, which I sit on, and we were the very first as far as we know, in the Commonwealth to have a Zoom meeting for an official parliamentary committee. So it can be done, and we know that our House leaders between the government, our caucus, and the third party are discussing possibility for reconvening in some fashion in the coming weeks and months.
Oh, that's great to hear, John. And you know, talking to all of our members, that is definitely one of the long-term takeaways from this pandemic. You know, I think even our board, we meet via Zoom, and I know city council is doing things electronically. So, you know, every organization is learning how they can use these new tools. And I think it's definitely going to be a positive, long-lasting takeaway from this. And on that note, you know, with more people working from home and probably a lot of people likely to be staying home, you know, it's having a major impact on our roads. And one thing that we've heard from many members and we've seen in the media, and I'm going to direct this question to Jas because I believe you're the official critic on this file, is auto insurance. Yeah. You know, we know that according to our weekly meeting with the local police chief, you know, we know that less people are driving. We do know there's more people speeding. We do know that the severity of crashes that are occurring are much worse than usual because I think with the emptier roads, people are being a little bit more reckless. But overall, the claims are way down, and we see jurisdictions around North America and beyond giving rebates back to their customers, but we haven't seen anything of that nature. I believe we saw a small tweak in BC. If you want to cancel your insurance, I think they waived a $30 fee, or it was something fairly minor. It was a nice gesture, but you know, I think a lot more could be done, and I'm definitely hearing that from a lot of our members and just people within my personal circles. So, what do you say to that, Jas?
Well, you know, this is you know, you're talking to the official opposition here, and I think we're having a good broad conversation. And what I'm about to say, I don't believe should be considered partisan. I think it's a legitimate criticism. Generally speaking, the way ICBC is run is that you pay your premiums. That, on a decent year, means we break even on payouts and what you pay in regards to your premium. The administration of ICBC is generally run through its sort of investment side of the organization. Whatever they make every year, a portion of that profit goes towards the running of the administration of ICBC. So in the 2018-2019 year, ICBC has generated about $5.9 billion in premium payments. The state of emergency in our province was declared on March 18th. As of this Wednesday, that would be 50 days of a state of emergency. And as you rightfully have said, Matt, and your members have said, there's a lot less of us on the road. So generally speaking, British Columbians, or ICBC, generates about $16 to $17 million per day in revenue. You do the back of the napkin math, you're almost near $900 million in revenue during this state of emergency. And what they have so far promised is if you cancel your insurance, you would get $30, as you rightly said, and they would also void the $18 replating fee for the license plate that you have to purchase when you go back. So $48. But you look at insurance companies across North America, across Canada, it's about $600 million in savings that they are returning to consumers. In the US, it's a little bit more than that. But what these companies have done, and this is not a private versus public debate, this is just about what we're doing here. What you're seeing essentially is that these companies have said, we're going to reduce your yearly payment by 10%, and in some cases 25%, across the board. ICBC has done none of that. I've talked on Blue in the Face to radio and television, done tons of media on this issue, and they've returned none of that money. There is a benefit to public institutions, a public healthcare system. We all know the benefits of it. In moments where you have a once in 100-year pandemic, this is where ICBC, and I would argue BC Hydro, needs to step up. and say, this, we are owned by the shareholders of our company are the public of British Columbia. Let's make sure we take care of them. A 10% waiver in regards to ICBC costs, I think probably would have done it. Maybe 15%, whatever you think is right. But at this point, all they've returned is $48, or promised to return is $48 in cancellation and replating fee. And they've done nothing about that. And I continue to talk about it. And I think when we look back at it, this is where I think ICBC did fail. And part of there is public perception challenges that they have. But this is a classic example of that. You could have saved, significant amount of dollars. A 10% reduction on your insurance makes a huge difference. When they went to BCUC, they expected about 75,000 British Columbians to cancel. And so that's where the cancellation fee, they waived that. But I think they could have done a lot more, and they just fell short. And I think that's something that is not going to help them over the long term. So do I wish there was more? Absolutely. But this is where they've made a conscious political and administrative decision, and mostly political, I think, in regards to saving dollars. But the money was there. Things are turning around at ICBC, and they could have done more. They didn't.
Oh, thanks, Jas. Now, I'm going to give this question to Teresa, especially considering your former portfolio looking after international trade. And it's been mentioned before, I believe, by John. But, moving forward, we're going to have to attract major business, international investment, do everything we can to get the economy and jobs flowing here in BC. So, Teresa, maybe you can start, and I'm sure some of your colleagues may want to jump in, but, what would you recommend we need to do to attract major business to BC in this current, uncertain era we find ourselves in?
Actually, I have to say that it's quite unfortunate that our government, BC Liberal government, has started setting up our overseas trade office in Asia and also in Europe and the United States. And it was so unfortunate that the current government decided to scrap their offices. The reason why we decided to set up this trade office of our own is because even though the federal government has their own trade commission office and all over the world, but then we all know that federal government focus might not be on BC. They will be focusing more on Quebec and Ontario. And that's why, from our experience, we need to have our own people promoting BC products to our major market, especially we are the gateway to North America, and we are on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. We have so much connection, personal connection, business connection, even government connection with the Asian countries. And it's important that we promote our trade to Asia because that's where our products are saleable. And right now, I am disappointed to see that I don't think the government will focus on that export. Right now, I think all the focus is on the internal economy, which is understandable, especially now that the priority is on safety. But then in order to think long term, because the government cannot just give out money for years and years, we need to jumpstart the economy. And how to jumpstart the economy? Because BC is such a small market, and we have such a great natural resources, and also we have high-tech industry as well. And that's what the Asian market needs from us. And I think we need to now think about how to reach out to our Asian business so that they will in turn import our business. That's very important. I think we need to speak out loud and clear to our government that we cannot just keep dishing out money, and if we don't have revenue, our economy will go down the drain.
Thank you, Teresa. And I want to get back to a question that I saw just pop up in the chat, and it was submitted by the member. And I think it's a great question. It's something that I'm thinking a lot about. Earlier in this call, Jas mentioned, the vaccine, and we all, of course, can't wait for a vaccine. But, when you look at what the experts are saying, a vaccine could be a very long way away. I mean, we have to kind of plan to how society is going to function, assuming there's not a vaccine. And hopefully much smarter people than I will solve that very soon, but it's not an easy task. And I think it's often downplayed in the media, and the talk of a vaccine in 18 months is quite optimistic in my opinion. So I think we need to plan, what does society look like, assuming there is no vaccine for possibly quite some time. Another thing that keeps me up at night is you look at any pandemic in, modern history, a second wave is a guarantee. you know, there is no doubt this is coming back this fall. We know how damaging this situation has been the last 2 months. We're going to have a bit of reprieve here over the summer, and we better be ready for what's coming back at us this fall. And I think now is the time to be focused on that. So the question, you know, one of our members very rightly pointed out that one of the reasons for the massive shutdown in our province and around the world was that hospitals and our healthcare systems just didn't have the capacity to meet, you know, this huge burden of people with respiratory issues and needing help all at once. So by forcing people to stay home and social distance, it minimized the impact on our healthcare system. And, you know, the crux of that issue was critical care beds. And we've done a good job here in BC. I don't think we've maxed out our critical care beds capacity that we have, but, you know, to my knowledge, we've done nothing to expand that critical care capacity. You've seen examples in other worlds where they've built hospital in days and weeks and they've rapidly expanded their capacity. You know, what is British Columbia's plan to expand our capacity and, you know, potentially expand our capacity, which might, you know, limit the need for drastic actions like we've seen, finding that balance between, you know, care for people, but also keeping society functioning. So I've kind of gone all over, but just to narrow the question back, you know, can you comment on what the official opposition's position is going to be on critical care beds and creating the infrastructure we need in our healthcare system to meet the demands of this situation that aren't going away anytime soon, unfortunately?
And I can probably start in terms of being the seniors critic. We've certainly increased, the province and the country has increased number of ventilators, number of infection control sites, the levels of cleanliness in hospitals, because you're exactly right. Pandemics are here to stay. And if you've not had the opportunity to watch it, I would encourage all of you to tune into Coronavirus Explained. It's a 17-minute documentary. You can find it on Netflix because it talks about this current scenarios today, a little bit historical, but it talks about what happens in the next round. Because if it's not coronavirus, it's not COVID-19, it could be something else as well. And how we respond to that. We've actually done probably the best job in the world is being demonstrated by Canada today. And certainly the capacity in place in hospitals and the increasing levels of ventilation system and ventilators has actually allowed us, I think, to do an amazingly good job. It's not necessarily hospital infrastructure, it's the actual equipment that's found in each of those rooms. And we are more than holding our own at the current time.
It's important to remember also, Matt, that, you know, no government, BC Liberal, NDP, or any other political party would ever cut the healthcare budget. It's just finding efficiencies with it. I sat on the Fraser Health Authority board, and I think we all, no matter what your political persuasion, we want a strong healthcare system. Right now, every one of you on this Zoom meeting, every dollar you pay in taxes, about 42 cents of that dollar goes to healthcare. And every year that healthcare budget grows. So we have to continue to grow the economy to make sure we continue to put money into the daily running of our system, which I think is about, the healthcare system is about $2 million per hour, the cost here in this province. And that's going to continue to grow. And then you got the capital costs on top of that with new hospitals and building beyond that. So I think in regards to the infrastructure in our system, it's good. And I think Linda raises a very good point in regards to it's the ventilators and those types of things that we have to be ready to buy and use moving forward, because there may be a second wave there. I believe the challenge we're also going to have in the fall, if there is that second wave, is one of biology, actually, which is we are all social animals. At this particular time, we've all been good Canadians who love peace, order, and good government, and have stayed home and have tried to, and have listened to government and health officials most importantly. My worry is the next time around, there may be a bigger swath of the population that says, no, I'm not going to do this again, or I'm not going to follow rules as closely as I did the first time. And that's one of the challenges I think we are going to have, and we don't sort of think about that as much, because I think you're seeing some of the protests in the United States, small groups, I would call them fringe groups, and you've seen protests here as well. But I think as we go into the fall, those are the challenges we're going to have. So that's why even now, when the public health officer, Bonnie Henry, comes and provides the guidepost to how to open up the economy, it's very broad and general. And I get called, I think it was a driving school in Kootenay just a few weeks ago. They want to put a partition in between a driver and a student, and they're training truck drivers. And they're not given clarity. They don't have sector representation. They don't have a trade association representing a driving school. So they called me, and I put this question directly to the deputy minister, and he didn't have an answer, but he said, I'm going to move it up the chain of command. And there are many other small businesses across British Columbia, and I guarantee you within this Zoom call, that need greater clarity. And I think the more we can provide today and now, the better chance we have of citizens and small businesses following rules in the fall as we get there. Because that's part of the frustration right now is, okay, you've announced something, but you haven't really told me what that means. Do I have to have a glass partition, which I was looking on Amazon yesterday for my own constituency office. Do I have to have a glass partition? How many people should I have in my store at any given time? Those are the kind of specific rules that have been handed over to WorkSafe. And this is my personal opinion. I think WorkSafe was caught off guard. And now they've got to provide sector by sector specific information on for those sectors, but then also for specific businesses that don't have trade associations representing them. So this is a work in progress in the next days and weeks ahead. And that's one we've been focusing on this week, because there isn't enough specificity in regards to what needs to be done for some of these businesses. The more we focus on this here and now, the better chance we have on the other side coming out.
Thank you, Jas. I've got another question here. This is actually from my chair, and I think it's a great question. It's following up on the question I previously asked Teresa about attracting international investment to BC. And John, I'm going to throw this your way. We know from many of our members that their supply chains have been gravely impacted during this pandemic. Especially goods coming from Asia. We've quickly forgotten, the wet sweat and protests and some of the massive disruption we had in our supply chains and rail corridors before the pandemic hit. Some of those problems still linger for some of our members. But I think many businesses, and I've spoken to some, will really be focused on how they can move some manufacturing back to Canada. Maybe they're depending on manufacturing happening in China and ships bringing that over and, rail cars bringing it to their business here. But we know some of them are going to want to bring those jobs and manufacturing capacity back to Canada. So I've seen this question. We've already posed to the feds, but I want to pose it as well to the provincial government, is what can be done at the provincial government level to encourage and facilitate this migration of opportunities and employment benefits back to British Columbia?
Sure, that's a great question, and it's one that is being discussed in so many venues. We are hearing that we read in the media that there's talk about the deglobalization of trade, and how certainly south of the border we're hearing that there's an emphasis on repatriating business, and apparently Japan as a jurisdiction is looking at encouraging and actually providing funding support for businesses to come back to Japan to do business. That's the bigger picture that, certainly that discussion can happen. In the meantime, the reality is business has to be competitive, right? As we get through this pandemic and to the new normal, what is it that's going to be, that has to be there for business to thrive? And I think if a business is able to find a way to create its product or manufacture or assemble here in Canada, they certainly should do that. But ultimately, all of you, those of you who are in business, that it is what is the most efficient and effective and provides a fair return on the investment. Those are the kind of key questions that you have to look at. I'm still an optimist. I believe that yes, right now there's a lot of talk about changing trade flows, but ultimately the future for British Columbia is as a trading subnational jurisdiction. We're only 5 million people, and we are so blessed with resources that we know people want. Our natural resource sector is world class, and when we get through this deep recession, some say it might be a depression, and hopefully it's a quick one. The world will need what British Columbia has to offer, and if we can, if our sectors can repatriate some of the production and manufacturing, or we can support growth in some sectors where we have a natural advantage of manufacturing here in British Columbia, we should certainly do that. Ultimately, the more we can generate an economic activity that flows into BC, the better.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, I've got another question here. It's a question slash comment. And Jas, you just mentioned this about, some of the uncertainty, and businesses and our members have a lot of questions right now. And, I think the news by the Premier is well received about, some businesses being allowed to open mid-May, but those businesses and our members who have the potential to reopen their business, they have a lot of questions and they don't know where to go. And every day when the province has a press conference, it's almost like, as far as the questions go, one step forward, two back. So for example, yesterday, Dr. Bonnie Henry said that businesses will not be required to submit a plan that will be approved by government to reopen, but they will be required to post a notice in their window or on their website and tell the public how they're protecting them and their employees. But, the thousands and thousands of businesses hoping to open mid-May. Again, I don't know what mid-May means. Is that May 15th? Is that later? Like, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and those members come to us, and it's our honor and privilege to find them answers and to help them. But, we'd really appreciate if you could help us as well. And, how do we guide those people when they're dealing with a provincial issue? We want to point them in the right provincial direction, and your offices are fantastic, and we very often, point members in your direction. But there's got to be a more streamlined process, because the questions I'm going to pick on fans' mind are often the same as 100 other members' mind. So just wondering if you can help. I expect a lot more to come as we talk more and more about reopening, which is fantastic. But how do we seek the provincial answers to the questions that we have today and the dozens more that we're going to have come Monday?
Yeah, so if some of you have a pen, I'm just going to give you a phone number first of all in regards to on the Open BC plan. It's 1-888 COVID-19. COVID-19, sorry, 1-888 COVID-19 in regards to the Open BC plan. So that's a general number you can call, and hopefully it's set up to provide information for individuals and businesses. And by all means, please contact our office if you're not getting that help for some reason. It does happen in this case. I think what happened this week, and my assessment of it, making phone calls, we were briefed the day before on what was coming. There was such a broad information dump that I think it confused people the first day. And then yesterday, as you rightfully said, Dr. Bonnie Henry said, well, you just need a notice. Which I think points out the point that I made, is that WorkSafe cannot visit every office. It's just impossible to. The underlying reality is that this is reliant upon public and business goodwill to say we're going to do the right thing as good corporate citizens and as good Canadians. So as long as you have a plan that's reasonable, washing your hands, a specific amount of people coming into your store, I'm just using that as an example, amount of people in your store, can people work from home in some cases and do Zoom meetings while some people might be at the office, depending on how many folks you have. If you work in a larger business, you don't want 10 people in an elevator. So perhaps on even days, a set amount of employees come in, on odd days, a set amount of employees come in. I was having a conversation with someone just yesterday. They're at the Bental Tower. That's how they may work some of these offices in bigger towers downtown. So as long as you have a plan as an employer, that will be sufficient enough. It's not going to be Big Brother or big government coming down to your office. The weakness of that is it comes down to actually an individual or a consumer coming into your store and saying, you're not following the rules, and then calling up a public health officer at the city or at the provincial level. But if you, as a good corporate citizen, have set rules and you believe those rules to be appropriate for the health and safety of your employees and your customers, that will probably be enough. I don't think Dr. Henry wants to bring in rules that are, you must follow these 10 rules, and if you don't, you're going to be shut down. And in some cases, look, there may be individuals and businesses that don't follow the rules. I bet you there are those individuals and businesses now. But broadly speaking, as a society, we've handled this well. And at times where we see people not doing the right thing, I think we do report it. That's essentially the course the provincial government has taken at this particular point. If you see broad-based cheating or a broad-based flouting of the rules, and many of you looked on your social media feed a month ago, You may recall people saying, well, there's a soccer game going on at XY field. There's too many people here. You sort of saw society itself. In some cases, it is public shaming, and it's not the right thing to do. But you saw some self-correction among society. And I think that's where Dr. Henry is sort of trying to set the parameters. We haven't had the lockdown that Quebec's had or other jurisdictions in Italy and Spain have had. So we've been lucky in that direction. We're allowed to go out and walk and go jogging and all those types of things. So that's where I think the provincial government is at. But this will move slowly. One, you don't have great clarity that you require, and we've been pushing on that as an opposition. But I think broadly speaking, if you can find the solution within your own company, put that up on a window, I think you'll be fine. So.
And Matt, I just wanted to add in, think of the businesses that have not closed. Think of the IGA store that's been with us every single day of this pandemic. They figured out how to do it, and they certainly have the dividers. They certainly have the marks on the floor to keep the public apart. You take 100 employees at the Blundell IGA store, then you ramp that down to the 2-3 employees at the UPS store in the same mall. They have a single entrance and exit point, but they have folks on either side of the door. They have folks, you know, stepping 6 feet apart. Very large company in Richmond, very small company in Richmond. They've never closed. So there's lots of good examples for those who are anticipating reopening, where there's not been any missteps. People have sort of learned and massaged and accommodated as they've moved down this path. And there's certainly lessons to be learned, but there are business examples today who have not had any closure that we can all take a good look at.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, Linda. And, you know, we really look forward to working with our members, sharing those best practices and, you know, getting those local businesses working together and sharing what working, what not. You know, we'd love to find ways once we get all the information, helping businesses conform with the posts in their window, or maybe it's online. You know, we have member directory listings. So we really look forward to working with our members and making sure they comply and getting them the answers and info they need. Now with that, I see we're at about 5 minutes left here. So I'm going to shift to closing remarks. I want to thank everybody so much for your questions. I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to get to all of them, but if it's okay with the MLAs, what we're going to do is after the call, we'll put together all the questions and we'll get especially the list that we didn't get to, and we're going to send that to all your offices. And if you don't mind, we'll say next week, get us some answers back, and we'll be sure to loop back with those members and get you answers to your questions. So thank you for submitting them, and I apologize if we didn't have a chance to ask them, but we really appreciate it. And for the final 5 minutes here, I'm going to start with Linda, and then I'll go for final remarks from John, and then we'll wrap things up. So Linda.
Actually, I'll go first. I agreed to give Linda the last word.
Okay.
This is just a tremendous opportunity. Thank you, everyone, for joining this Zoom town hall. There have been some great questions, and I can see from the group chat that there are some other great questions that we'll get to, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to them during this hour. We've just been going through and are still going through unprecedented, you know, once in a 100-year event, all of us. And, you know, we can be thankful that here in British Columbia, we have on the public health side done actually very well, because everyone has pitched in, has stayed home, has, you know, done what they needed to do to be safe. And our health system, in spite of its challenges, has done so well for us. And now, as we look at the next phase, it's up to all of us to continue down this path of keeping that infection curve flat as possible, because as we heard, there's going to be a second wave, and we'd like that wave to be as low as possible and not a spike in infections requiring another shutdown of our economy in you know, the next months. So all of us have a role, and you know, I want to thank all of you for your personal role in this, and as business and community leaders, all of you will have a critical role in leading and showing the way as we all go through the next phase, as had been outlined by the government. And I'm hopeful that as we showed in phase 1, and we get through phase 2 and phase 3 and down into the most challenging aspects of the reopening of our economy, that this can happen in a way that works for British Columbia and that we can get to the new normal as safely as possible. So thank you all for your contributions, for being here today.
Thank you, John.
My thanks to
Linda.
Matt. My thanks to Matt and to the Chamber. Unprecedented times, no question. There are 126 British Columbia families today who've lost someone to COVID-19. So our heartfelt condolences. The path to rebuilding a resilient economy will be long. There is no question it will be long. How we go forward, how we stay together. I mean, my accolades to Bonnie Henry and to Minister Dix. It's not an easy road to hoe. We probably have the most reassuring voice in Bonnie Henry of anywhere in the country. I'm certainly grateful for that. The notion that we have, I think the government has demonstrated enormously their ability to move quickly. It's not something we've truly been privy to in the past. We don't want to lose any of that momentum because it will be challenging to rebuild, no question. The challenges for small business in terms of operating at 25% capacity, 50% capacity, whatever it turns out to be, well, I think we'll bring even bigger challenges on a go-forward basis. There are going to be renewal opportunities, no question. And most of us today, I think, are old enough to remember Hollywood Squares. This format works. I'm grateful for the Chamber for trying it. I'm grateful for the opportunity. And I apologize because most of us as MLAs give longer answers than we probably need to. Hopefully next time we do this, we'll have greater opportunity to have more questions coming from all of you, because it's truly important that we stay together, that we understand how vitally important this is. Because if it's not COVID-19 next year, what is coming down the pike? How do we respond? How do we take the lessons we've learned today and bring it to bear? Because capacity questions for business, I mean, the best social program in the world is a job. The notion that we have today, 264,000 jobs in the month of April lost to British Columbia, 2 million jobs by Stats Canada report this morning lost to Canada. That is work that we have to turn around. We have to find ways to accommodate the needs of those families so that they have opportunities to care for their individuals in their lives. Hugely important that we stand together to do that. So Matt, over to you for the last word.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Linda. I love that line. The best social program is a job. And I think, you know, considering the terrifying numbers that we saw released this morning, that's never been more true than ever. So our chamber looks very much looks forward to working with you and your role as opposition. You know, we've had a great, I have to say, working relationship with the provincial government during this crisis. I do have to give kudos to you and your government. I think the collaborative spirit that we've seen here in British Columbia is really special and something, and I commend you and your colleagues for working with government, kind of putting down the political sabers during this pandemic and coming together to do what's needed for all British Columbians. So thank you for what you're doing. I think as we start to get open for business, we'll see the opposition morph back into the opposition, and we really look forward to working with government and opposition to do what's right for our members. So thank you very much, and don't be surprised if I email you in coming weeks to set up another Zoom event in the near future. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone who attended. It's 11 a.m. on a beautiful Friday. I think probably the nicest weekend of the year in front of us. So make sure you social distance, but get out there and enjoy the sunshine. But thanks everybody.
Everyone. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.